That was past class and better for free. 3 new episodes for us each week. Effectively wild. Effectively wild.
Hello and welcome to episode 2417 of Effectively Wild, a baseball podcast from FanGraphs presented by our Patreon supporters. I am Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer, not joined today by Meg Rowley of FanGraphs, who's off this week. We'll catch up on signings and trades next time. Lots of transactions to talk about, but I've got a couple of good guests for you today. In Meg's stead, I will be bringing you none other than ESPN senior MLB insider Jeff Passan. Jeff will join me in just a sec for a wide-ranging conversation about how he reports and announces news, his thoughts on social media, his work-life balance, his dalliance with switching to the basketball beat, and so much more. He'll even answer a call from a source while we are podcasting. We'll also get into some big-picture hot stove questions, the outlook for a lockout, and much, much more. It is, I think, a revealing, engaging conversation with one of baseball's biggest and best media members. Also, I will warn you, there's a bit of profanity. Jeff drops a few F-bombs, and I told producer Shane, maybe we won't bleep them this time, just because it's fun to hear Jeff Passan say some words that he wouldn't say on SportsCenter. So be warned, cover your kids' ears if you care to. After that, The Athletic's Sam Blum will come on to talk about the ins and outs of a wrongful death case filed by the family of former Angels pitcher Tyler Skaggs against the Angels. That case reached its conclusion on Friday. It resulted in a settlement, but Sam has a whole lot to share from following and covering that case closely. So I hope you won't want to miss that conversation either. But first, making his long-awaited return to the podcast, Jeff Passan. Joining me now is ESPN senior MLB insider Jeff Passan, who somehow hasn't been on this show since 2018. Jeff, thanks for joining us outsiders again.
7 years, my God.
It's a long time.
Dude,
to be
all
clear,
you had to do is ask.
I know, it's not as if we've been inviting you and you've been big-timing us, to be clear. I feel guilty about bothering you. I sent you a text this morning and apologized that it was not a hot tip about a transaction, because I assume that you're just constantly blowing up with more important texts.
I try to. That doesn't lessen your importance, Ben Lindbergh. I mean, I'm just like, apparently I haven't done anything relevant in 7 years. That sucks.
I mean, you do have some other platforms that you can go on that have welcomed you from time to time. So it's not as if you're lacking in media exposure, but you're going to get the big FanGraphs Effectively Wild bump this time. Hopefully we'll do it again in fewer than 7 years, but we'll see how it goes. You know, we'll consider it a trial. And let's get the ground rules straight here, because we dodged a bullet with the Shane Baz trade, which you partially reported, going down about an hour before we were due to talk. So how major a move would have to transpire while we're speaking for it to disrupt the podcast?
Probably not very much.
Yeah, the bar's pretty low.
Yeah, like if there's a big leaguer involved, I'm probably going to big league you. Like, not lying.
Well, I just said you hadn't been big timing us, but you might be about to be. That's fair. I don't want to get in between you and a scoop. And if we could capture you composing a breaking news tweet while we're podcasting, even better. That would be riveting radio.
Well, I have one ready right now. I think by the time this is up, the three-way trade among Pittsburgh, Houston, and Tampa Bay is going to be done. But I generally have a rule by which I try my very best to abide, that until players have been informed, I do not report their names. Sometimes in the fog of war, so to speak, that doesn't happen. But in this case, there has been no informing. There's still medicals going on. So that is why Chandler Rome and Ken Rosenthal wrote about it a while back. And I have not acknowledged it publicly to this point.
Because those guys, they have no scruples.
They have plenty. Listen, everyone can do the job the way he or she sees best fit. And there have just been some instances in the past where, like, a guy came up to me and said, "Do you know that I found out that I got traded from your Twitter?" And I felt kind of terrible about that because, look, we forget sometimes that as much as we enjoy the transactions and as much as we enjoy crazy things going on in baseball, that people's lives are at stake here, and people's there are a few things in life that are more alarming to someone, I think, than, oh, by the way, you're going to be plying your trade somewhere else. You're going to have to move. It doesn't matter what your situation is familially. You might have a kid on the way. You might be getting married. There are always things that we don't know about that affect people as human beings. And I don't know that it's particularly fair that somebody learns their life's going to be turned upside down through social media. And that's something like I think treating the people I cover like human beings rather than I'm not going to say chattel, but like pieces of a larger business it's not how I like doing things. So I try to abide by these standards as much as I can, and I lose scoops because of it. And frankly, I'm okay with that.
You're a man of principle. I admire it. And how do you, I don't expect you to give away all of your methods, but can you always confirm that the player has been informed? Because you can't text the player and say, hey, did you hear that you got traded? Because that'd be a bit of a spoiler yourself. So I assume that you then have to confirm it with the team or the agent that is telling that player, and they may or may not get back to you.
You know, I think it depends on my relationship with a player too, because a lot of times players will know that they're on the trade block. Okay. And if I have the kind of relationship with a player where I know that he would appreciate me telling him, then I will do. I have done that before. Yes.
I see. Oh, interesting. So you don't want them to find out from you tweeting about it, but it's okay if they find out from you texting them about it.
I think
it's an important distinction.
Am I being hypocritical there? Because I see it's a very narrow line.
Either way, you're getting a notification from Jeff Passan, but I guess it's a personalized notification as opposed to.
I think that's exactly what it is. It's like I'm you know what? I'm not going to DM you or text you that you've been traded. It would always be via a phone call. But maybe I'm just old fashioned that way and thinking that like talking to somebody and delivering them life-changing news is better than doing it via text. It's like if someone's breaking up with you, wouldn't you rather it be done like in a phone call or face-to-face conversation rather than a text? Well, they're getting broken up with by their team.
Maybe teams should just start ghosting players. Just, never tell them, and then they show up in spring training and the door is barred. That would probably be worse. I think it's always nice to notify them one way or another. If you do fire off some tweets while we're talking, that's okay. It would not be a first. Every now and then, I'll see that Meg posted something on Blue Sky while we were speaking.
Oh.
I'll think, how did she do that? Was that while I was talking? Was that while she was talking? So I'm sure that you've tweeted out news mid-interview before. It would not be a first for you either.
I have, but the problem is when I'm actually doing the talking, I'm worried that I'm going to conflate what I'm thinking in my head and what I'm typing with my fingers. And I make typos occasionally, perhaps not as occasionally as some peers do, but I make typos occasionally, and I get reamed for them. So like my great fear is that I'm going to be talking and thinking about somebody and they're not involved with what I'm typing, but their name's going to get in there. Like you've done that before,
sure,
right?
Yeah. That'd be the worst case scenario. You notify someone that they were traded and they weren't actually. It was the wrong player entirely.
Oh, dude, that's like, I mean, the great fear that I live with every day is just getting things wrong. And not just because it's the job to get them right, but because it's sort of like my brand now. I don't like that word. I find it kind of obnoxious, but I think that I'm, if not the guy, then a guy that people look at and they're like, if he says it, it's true. And I don't ever want that to change. I feel like that's an extraordinarily important thing because you're only as good as the trust that you've got from the people that you're delivering this information to. And if they feel like they lose trust in me because I get something wrong, then, I'm worthless.
Well, speaking of blue sky, when are you going to lighten the load on the poor, hardworking Jeff Passan bot over there and head over to the other side yourself?
I have zero interest in expanding my social media presence whatsoever. If I could nuke every account, I would.
Yeah,
I find, generally speaking, I find social media to be a horrible and destructive tool, and all of the good that we have seen from it, and that we still see occasionally, is far outweighed by just what it does to our brains, what it does to us as people.
Yeah,
I mean, social media. Like, let's just be real. Social media is a drug, and we have all been fed it, and the vast majority of us have willfully become addicted to it. And I think if we acknowledge that, then and we start wondering, does the utility of what we get from it outweigh the damage that it does, not just us individually, but writ large? It's kind of a scary answer that you don't want to ask yourself, because I think it's pretty self-evident.
Yeah, well, can't make any typos if you don't tweet at all, which is mostly my policy these days. But
I was going to say the Tom Verducci corollary.
Yes, exactly. Tom
was the smart one with us. I got sucked in. I was in, I think I was in Big Bear, and this is back when I was with Yahoo, and I was meeting Shaun White for breakfast because I did, I covered the Olympics in addition to baseball at Yahoo, and I got a text that morning from somebody that Aroldis Chapman, who had defected from Cuba, was about to sign. So this shows you how long ago it was. Like, my social media career has spanned Aroldis Chapman's professional baseball career in the United States. And my first tweet, I believe it was something to the effect of a Cuban left-hander. I think I said Albertine Aroldis Chapman, because I think that's what his given name is signing with a National League Central team. Didn't realize it was the Reds. Didn't have the sourcing at the time to lock that down, because I think this was back in 2009. That is how I started. And can you look at how many tweets you've sent?
There is a way to check that on some platforms, I think, but maybe it's better not to know.
I mean, it has to, we have to be at the point where it's five figures.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's paid off for you in some respects, but you are kind of chained to it. And it's true. I remember the first episode of this podcast was actually about whether Aroldis Chapman should be a starter or a reliever. That was in 2012. So we're still going. I guess we're both prisoners of podcasts / social media now. And it all started with Aroldis Chapman in both cases. He's been around for a while, I guess, is the takeaway here.
Yeah, I think the takeaway from me is that I'm fucking old. I'm 5 years shy of 50 now, man. We're getting up there. I have a kid going to college next year. I feel like that's getting into old ass territory.
To play baseball, no less. Although I think you've just confirmed some news yourself, because I don't know if you know this, but your Wikipedia page says Jeff Passan, parentheses, born 1980 or 1981. And then under your image, it says age 44 to 45. So you have not been pinned down on exactly how old you are, but I think you just spilled the beans. You're the big 4-5, it sounds like.
I am the big 4-5. 1980 is that is the correct birth year for anybody who wants to edit the Wikipedia page.
Excellent. Straight from the primary source. Okay. Well, I think people are often surprised, though, that you are as old as you are. I'm not calling you old. You called yourself old. But you have a youthful face, I think. When people find out that you're about to have a kid in college, I think they're sometimes surprised by that. So you must be moisturizing or something.
It's a little alarming to people, which I very much appreciate. And it's going to change. The gray hairs are starting to come in more frequently, and I have resolved to let that happen naturally. There is always going to be a sense of vanity that is particularly acute when you're spending time on television.
Yeah, you're an on-camera personality. You're in 4K sometimes too, probably. It's unforgiving.
Hope not, but yes, I imagine that I am. But I've always admired men who age gracefully with the subtle graying of their hair. That to me signals a transition into not adulthood, but into knowing shit.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like I am in my life right now. I feel like I understand things a little bit better. Like I've loved my 40s. Like I was a little scared because I feel like it marks the midpoint of your life. And who knows how that's going to go. And then like you get hit by a tree and that's no fun. But
no,
I found myself a much calmer presence and soul in my 40s. And I've, half a decade in, I've been enjoying them.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm not there yet, but I'm not far from it. So I'm looking forward to my 40s too. So that's good to know.
I mean, you're gonna wake up in the morning and ask yourself, why does this hurt?
Yeah.
Like there's that part of it is very real. Like body changes, that happens. So get ready for that. But they're outweighed. I think in a positive fashion by the brain evolving as well.
Yeah, there is that idea of some research that suggests that aging hits us all at once at various times. Maybe you've seen it's like 44 is one of the years supposedly. I'm skeptical because it just sounds unlikely to me that we would all be just hit by age at the same time. But it's like 44, 60. It's, it goes from like a gradual thing to all at once. So
yeah, but dude, isn't it the same way when you buy an appliance now? You have a finite number of years on it. Like the pieces and the parts are likely to corrode or to be used to the point where no longer they're effective after a certain period of time. I think you can kind of apply the same thing to body parts, can you not?
Maybe. I mean, people say that about pitchers, as you know well from writing The Arm, the idea that you have only so many bullets in the elbow, that sort of thing, which it's probably true to some extent, but I'm always skeptical of that too, just because you can do things to reload the chamber or empty it more or less slowly, right? So if you take care of yourself, condition, don't abuse the body, then it will last a little longer. But within reason, I guess. There's sort of a planned obsolescence. I mean, if we're talking about, iPhone batteries expiring so that you have to get a new one, that kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know if bodies work exactly the same way, but we do all have an expiration date.
All I know is I have a refrigerator in my basement. It was our old refrigerator, and we kept it around just to have another one. And this thing is rusted. It's got holes it's like a freezer on top, fridge on bottom. Like there's a hole between the freezer and the fridge. I don't know where it came from or why it's there, but it is. And that fucker just keeps ticking. And I know one day, like, we're going to wake up and hopefully I catch this before we have like a bunch of rotted meat and maggots in that fridge. But that thing, man, that thing has been a lifesaver, and it's got to be 20 plus years old right now. So I feel like I have the Justin Verlander of refrigerators downstairs.
Yeah.
Something that just, it's an outlier. And Justin Verlander is much prettier than this refrigerator. Like this thing it's just an unsightly looking mess, but it gets the job done. Maybe it's like the Jamie Moyer of refrigerators.
Yeah, the ageless lefty. It's going to be a sad day when that refrigerator goes. It's probably going to force some sort of midlife crisis for you. Maybe it's like Rich Hill, right? It's like as long as Rich Hill's around. Is Rich Hill older than you, or I'm trying to pin down your exact age now, but Rich Hill is also 45. Let's see. He was March 11th, 1980.
I was going to say Rich Hill's got me by 6 months. So
okay. All right. Perfect.
Yeah, it's the last. I mean, when you cover baseball for a long time, there's always like that day where you're older than every player. Rich Hill has been doing yeoman's work.
Yes, he's
in keeping me from having that be the case. But it feels like it's coming. Like it's happening. It's imminent, and it gets to the point then where I feel like I have to acknowledge that the players who are coming up right now could be my kids. Like,
Sure.
The 21 years old, like that, he very easily could be a kid. And I have to check myself sometimes with the kinds of relationships that I have with these players and the kinds of things that I talk about them. I don't want to be Steve Buscemi. How do you do, fellow kids? But I also need to be able to have those kinds of conversations with them where they see me as someone who's valuable and worth their time and talking to and telling their stories. So it's a constant balancing act for me in trying to acknowledge that these relationships are necessary, but not overplaying my hand in terms of how I connect with people.
Yeah, I don't, you don't have the skateboards over your back or anything. You are constantly in a suit. Are you in a suit right now?
I'm not in a suit right now.
Not in a suit. Wow,
I'm in my winter uniform. I've gotten to the point now, and God, this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but I really don't care. That's what we get in our 40s, Ben. We stop caring about embarrassing things. But if I find a shirt that I like, I will buy it in all the colors. Like I will do that. And there's this particular pair of REI like fleece type pants that fit me well, that are comfortable, that I love, and I will scour eBay to find these pants because they don't make them anymore. So I think I have 7 or 8 pairs of this one type of pants, and I just I rotate through them, so it looks like I'm wearing the same thing every day. It is either some kind of hoodie, or I have like this cashmere hoodie that I love. I have like 5 of the same kind. So if it looks like I don't have a lot of clothes, it's because I don't. But when I find something that I like, I will use it and abuse it to no end.
You rarely appear in public in the REI pants. I don't think you are famous for a suit. That is probably part of your brand, even if you don't like having a brand. You and Will Leach, I don't think I've ever seen outside of a suit in a public place. So I'm just saying it's not as if you're trying to dress down to fit in with a younger crowd. You've been sporting the suit since you were the younger crowd. So
no, but I did it at the All-Star game a couple of years ago. I was meeting up with some sources at a club in Hollywood, and I showed up and I was wearing shorts.
Oh, wow.
And the dress code did not let me in. Thankfully, one of the people I was meeting was able to finagle things. And so this was I think Travis Kelce was there that night, and there were a couple of other like very famous people. I was the only guy wearing shorts. And so I think I will in my head try to do things that seem like they would be right, but I lack feel in that area to a great extent. So
well, it's a lack of experience with casual dress. So. So we've established that this podcast does not rate highly enough to preclude you breaking news while you're speaking to me. But is there a bar? There clearly is a bar for you to tweet something at all. And I wonder where that bar is because, there's a little bit of quid pro quo that goes into news breaking probably. And maybe agents want to get their guys the attention of getting a tweet from some big newsbreaker. And so maybe they're feeding you that info, but then you have to decide, is this journalistically worthy of everyone's time? And so where do you draw that line? And do you have to break that news to an agent? This guy doesn't quite merit a Passan tweet.
Yes, and it's always a very uncomfortable conversation, but there will be times where, if I know a player, for example, and he asks, then I feel like I'm pretty much obliged to do at that point. There's a small segment of people on Twitter that I've come across recently who will show. I don't know if it was a Slack message or a Discord message. I can't really tell because I don't use either. But they've started calling the quote unquote lesser news pointless pings. and I honestly, I kind of like delivering pointless pings. I kind of take a perverse pleasure when people say this was not worthy of a Passan tweet.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that's fair. Is it because a player has to be at a certain level for me to acknowledge them? I don't like that. I try to look at baseball as a universe where there are many, many different people. And some of those people happen to be star players or very good players or players worthy of multi-year contracts. And I respect them, but I respect every bit as much the guy who might not be as talented or might not be as good and has to work that much harder to maintain his career. And the notion that I'm going to ignore that because there's some perception that news I deliver has to be at a particular level, I just don't agree with that. I don't like that. I think it sets a bad precedent, and I think it says something. I think it would be an arrogant thing to do. I have respect for anybody who goes out there and tries to play professional baseball, and I think that respect has grown, frankly, in seeing my kid just trying to play college baseball. You know, you never have the types of relationships unless you're writing a book on someone where you're in their lives every day and understand what they have to go through. So my information's always limited on players, but seeing my son and the things that he's had to do to, you know, he could have played low-level Division I baseball, and I think he would have been good there. But he prioritized academics, and so he's playing D3 baseball. And, you know, just to become a competent Division III baseball player has taken a ton from him and taken a ton out of him. And getting to see that whole process and see what he's put in, it's very exciting, and it makes me swell with pride. And I'm getting a call right now, so I'm going to pick this up. Okay. Hold on one second.
Okay.
I am doing Ben Lindbergh's podcast right now. I will make sure to do that. I will not. I mean, we're literally recording live right now, so I'm not going to tell him that you said hello, specifically who you are. But Ben, this person says hi.
All right. Well, provisionally, I return the hi without knowing who I'm highing.
I will give you a call a little bit later. I appreciate you understanding. And is there anything pertinent or imminent, or do you just want to bullshit? I will make sure to do that. All right. I'll talk to you soon. And that is how my day goes, Ben Lindbergh, right there.
Look at that.
that is a little narrow window into the life of what breaking news is like.
Incredible. Yeah. And I outranked whoever that was. Maybe you can tell me later so I can feel good about myself.
I'm not going to say you outranked, but because there was he does have a little bit of news there, but he said it could wait a little while, so okay. That's okay.
Right. Still, I'll take it. Makes me feel good. Makes me feel important. Say someone got big timed because of Ben Lindbergh instead of Ben Lindbergh getting big timed. That's exciting. So I was going to ask you about the standard for tweeting, though, given that you have many people hanging on your every word in the off season, because you did, as everyone was sitting down to Thanksgiving dinner on the evening of November 27th, break the news that you are thankful for gravy. And that alert presumably went out to many thousands of people who probably thought, either why am I being bothered while I'm eating my turkey, or this must be big news. Kyle Tucker must have signed on Thanksgiving Day. Otherwise, why would Passan be tweeting right now? And then it was that you were thankful for gravy. I assume that was something of a troll, but still, just if social media is a drug, you're supplying some of the highs, and you have to know that the second you press tweet, that many people around the world are going to be notified about that. And I guess you like to have fun with that sometimes.
Yeah, I do know that. And I think I'd like to believe that part of my appeal is that I don't take things all that seriously. And I understand this is a many billion-dollar business. And I need to have rigor in covering it, and I need to understand the power of the position that I'm in. When people look to you to deliver them news, Like you can't be frivolous all the time, but a little bit of frivolity, I think, is important. And frankly, I don't think gravy is a frivolous thing. I take it very seriously. The thickness matters, and I made my own turkey stock this year, so I was very proud of my gravy. And on a day like that, it was my little way to acknowledge to everyone that I hope you're having a very good Thanksgiving without saying so in such an earnest fashion. And also beyond that, like, who doesn't like gravy, man?
Yeah, not a controversial take in particular.
No,
but
it's not, but sometimes it needs to be said. Sometimes things that are not as appreciated as they should be need to get some love. And I don't know how many engagements that tweet had. I genuinely do not follow that sort of thing. Like, my mom will text me, "Did you see how many likes you had?" And I was like, "No, Mom, I didn't, but thank you. I'm glad you're following." But when it comes to matters of great import, like food, I'm not going to fuck around with that. I think it's important to let the world know what you like, and gravy deserves love as much as anything else.
Roughly 7,000 likes on that one. And that was about half as many as the Dylan Cease deal the day before, but more than the Ryan Helsley deal the next day. So gravy outdid Ryan Helsley.
Gravy over Helsley.
Yeah. And I like that you'll chop it up on Twitter sometimes. And it's nice because, you're senior MLB insider. I mean, it's great gravity goes along with this position. And clearly you take that responsibility seriously. But there are some newsbreakers who just keep it to the facts, and it's all business, and everything is just baseball and not much personality there. But you're a real rascal on there sometimes. So I appreciate that that's still true, even though you do have a large platform.
It's a tough thing to balance, and there are a lot more deleted tweets where I've had enough incidents that have rubbed my bosses, understandably, by the way.
You've been chastised by unspecified employers at times.
I don't think chastised. I think it's more the tack that I take with my kids. Like, you did this. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. And boy, the power of disappointment is a very, very strong tool. And in these cases, it's just I have to ask myself, like, okay, what's the downside here? Is this worth it? And most of the time, the answer is no. And even sometimes when I do hit that post button, I say to myself, well, did that reach the threshold? Like, are you doing something here that you shouldn't be doing? But I have to be extremely cognizant of it, because that's the right thing to do. And because a lot of times, I should be the adult in the room. So act like it.
Yeah, it does help humanize you, I think, that you're more than just a transaction tweeter, that there's an actual person behind the tweets.
I hope so. And that's, that's what I've been proudest of over the last, 10, 15 years as my career has taken off, that I think people see that I really do love baseball, and that I really do care about the game and the people who are in the game, and bringing new people into it and getting them excited. Like, that to me, a scoop, like, that's great, but that's just the job. It's the decision I made, a decade plus ago, that I'm going to foray into this area where I was frankly terrible at it and didn't like doing it. And let's see if I
read that your wife prodded you into it by, I think your word was emasculating you, because you had some trepidation about being a newsbreaker and whether you could cut it in those circles. And she was just like, what are you waiting for? Just do it. What are you afraid of?
pretty much. She and as usual, she was right.
Smart move. Yeah.
It has made my life completely different and on a completely different trajectory than it would have been otherwise.
Although I wonder whether she ever regrets that when you are tied up with something unpredictably and she's like, I caused this. I opened Pandora's box by lighting this fire under him, and now he's tied up on the phone all the time.
Yeah, there are those moments for sure. I'd like to think that the good outweigh the bad, but to me, this is a job that has a finite amount of time where you can do it and do it well. And it's why I respect Ken Rosenthal as much as I do. I mean, he has been doing this at an extremely high level for a really long time. And, being right matters to him, and being good matters to him. And, he's for my generation, he's been the standard. And, I don't know how much longer Ken's going to do this. But once he stops, I hope that for the next generation, I can sort of provide that. I hope they look at me the same way that I look at him.
I had a couple more questions about the mechanics of all of this news breaking business. How do you decide if something's big enough for a breaking, an all caps breaking, which I think you reserve for if you are actually the one breaking it, which
Correct.
Seems right. Occasionally I see someone doing a breaking on something that someone else broke.
Hate that.
It's like stolen transaction clout or something. You can't do the breaking if you didn't break it.
Breaking should be reserved for I have it first.
Right.
And that's it. And my all caps tends to be, the threshold tends to be $50 million or more.
Oh, interesting. Okay. See, so you did breaking for Schwarber, for Alonso. You did do breaking for Robert Suarez, which I think was right below that 50 million threshold. But
that's correct. Do you know what pushed that one over the edge to be an all caps breaking? The fact that I beat at Braves.
I see. Yeah, that's rare. Yeah, you didn't get the press release with the Braves Foundation donation and everything.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
So it's it's not a hard and fast rule. I think I did it for Justin Verlander going to the Giants last year.
You did it for the Michael Garcia extension. You did it for the Nimmo Semien trade, but no breaking for Kenley Jansen, Dustin May, the Taylor Ward for Grayson Rodriguez. Those just get that you prefaced with trade news, just a much more restrained trade news.
Yeah, and lowercase consonants and vowels were used in there as well.
Yes, you did say quite a trade at the end, but still, not quite breaking.
There are occasionally like 3 or 4 word summations at the end. So if it's a big one, I'll usually have something like that.
Another thing I wonder is how you keep track of who had it first. And, some people think it's silly that everyone's constantly crediting who had it first. I think it's nice. I think it's collegial. I think it shows that there's some fraternity here, or that you have respect for each other's work. And even if no one else is really keeping score other than you, the newsbreakers, I still think there's something laudable about that. But I just wonder, sometimes you're ahead of or behind someone by a minute or 2 minutes. So how do you even know as you're composing the tweet whether you have it first? Do you have notifications set up for everyone? And are you just quickly scanning everyone else's feed to see if you're first? Do you add the had it first after the fact? How does that work?
Often the credit will come in a follow-up tweet. Because I think that I look at it like if I'm writing a news story and somebody has beat me first, I'm not putting that in the first paragraph. Yeah, they deserve acknowledgement and recognition for what they do, but it is not always necessarily the first thing that comes to mind. So when you're limited by 280 characters, that will occasionally factor into it. Mm-hmm. I have notifications for pretty much everyone you think I would have notifications for.
Okay. All right, good to know.
It's not, all the national guys, more or less. Some and there are handfuls of beat writers who tend to get news on their teams, and I'll have them on as well.
Yeah.
And if my notifications also, like if I know somebody is about to sign, but it's not done yet, and it so happens that whether it's because I have a sense of another reporter's relationship with the front office or with an agent, I will add and subtract during the winter notifications.
Well, one interesting thing is that you have to have a lot of notifications on because even though you break a ton of news, it's more widely distributed, I think, the news breaking in baseball than it is on other sports beats where, your colleagues, Shams, Schefter, they just kind of own those corners, it seems like. It's almost monopolistic, and Woj before them. Whereas in baseball, I consider you and Ken kind of the class of the newsbreakers. But then, your colleagues, Jesse Rogers, Buster Olney, there's Ken, there's Heyman, there's Nightingale sometimes, there's Murray, there's Sherman, there's Curry, there's Salmon, there's Morosi, there's Feinstein. There's a pretty long list of national folks and even local folks who get scoops. So what accounts for that difference in MLB compared to other leagues, other sports?
I think that there are similar. It's not quite as acute. There are similar situations in other sports, though. Like, Adam's the best in football, but Ian Rappaport will get stuff. In the NBA, it's a handful of guys aside from Shams. But yeah, baseball. I think I've asked myself why, and I've never come up with a particularly good answer. Maybe I'm just not as good as Adam and Shams. I mean, that's probably the answer.
I feel like I need to, channel your wife here and just be like, be better. Just own everything. This is your corner.
Could I do that? Probably not. But if I tried, I think the balance that I've struck in my life that has me in a very contented place would probably cease to exist. And that balance is more important to me than owning everything.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that too, because yes, Woj and Shams and Schefter, these guys have talked pretty frankly about the sacrifices that they have to make in order to do what they do. And granted, they're well compensated for that. But these sound like horror stories sometimes. It's like I'm taking the phone into the shower. I can't go to dinner. I can't go on a date, all these things. From afar, you seem to actually have a fulfilling personal life and be fairly well adjusted. You're married. You have a couple kids. It seems like you have some measure of balance here. The way that some other people, colleagues, counterparts tell it, it's like you couldn't pay me enough to do that. I don't think. Not that anyone has offered, to be clear. So that contention hasn't actually been tested, but it just sounds like I don't know that any money in the world would be worth this sort of thing. And I'm a fairly hard worker, but that's like an entire another level. So I wonder about that. And also just about the general unpredictability of your life sort of being subject to news. When I emailed you on Monday, we're speaking on Friday, I emailed you on Monday to see if maybe you could talk today. And you said that should be good, but subject to news, understandably. So everything you do essentially is subject to,
Yes.
So that has to take its toll.
I guess so. I just if the toll was too great, I'd just stop.
Yeah.
That's the reality. If it was too much, or if it was putting me in a position where the juice was not worth the squeeze, I would find something else to do. And I think over time that's going to be the case. My oldest is going to be out of the house in August. My youngest is going to be a freshman in high school next year. And he's going to be off to college in 4 years. And at that point, I haven't taken I haven't seen the world with my wife. I would like to do that. I don't sleep nearly as much as I should. And I do not want the end of my life to be shortened on account of the things that I was doing to do this job well.
Speaking of the body breaking down.
Yeah. And so that, There are going to be ways, I think, to transition out of that. But I also ask the question, if I'm not doing news, and this tends to be a rhetorical question. I've actually asked it to some people because I don't know the answer to it. But if I'm not doing news, do I matter anymore? And mattering is not important to me. Like, I don't sit here and try and get relevancy, or I don't think I do clickbait online. Like, I try desperately not to, because I don't ever want to be accused of that. But, where is my relevance in the industry if I'm not doing news? And that matters to me, because what I found over time, what I didn't realize earlier on in my career, and what's been such a boon to me, is that chasing news forces me to make the phone calls that I might not have otherwise. And in those phone calls, I learn about all kinds of other things. And I know the sport better now because, and this is directly attributable, because of news, I am better at understanding baseball and all of its tentacles now than I ever was beforehand when I wasn't focusing on it. So am I going to lose that element of things if news is not the number one priority? We'll see. Like, there are a lot of great ways to cover baseball, and the one that I found has been enormously beneficial for my life, for my family's life, and we've managed to. I don't miss high school baseball games. Like, I just don't. That is, my bosses know that is my priority, and it's going to be. And if there's some news going on, then I will figure out how to do it from the game, because I don't need to miss these things that I don't have many more of.
Well, this seems like another difference between the baseball newsbreakers and the newsbreakers in other sports, is that you write a lot, which I really respect. You're prolific. You're an excellent writer, of course, but you will write in-depth features and thousands of words. And look at Ken cranking out a column every day, right? And so there seems to be this expectation. I don't know if it's personal preference, just that you guys really value the written word and would miss it. But it seems like some other newsbreakers are primarily just breaking news, and maybe they'll do a brief write-up of that news, but it's essentially the tweet, and that's the value, and that's the proposition. I don't know whether that's because of the literary tradition of baseball, or because baseball news breaking isn't quite as just big as basketball or football news breaking, the audience or the appetite for it, or what. But why is that? Why is it that you have not pivoted entirely towards the news breaking, but you still do everything?
If I weren't telling stories, I would feel like I've lost the plot. I got into the journalism industry because I felt like I had the ability to take all of the things that are going on into the world, or going on in the world rather, and in this narrow world of baseball, and explain them to people and be a teacher of sorts. And I love that. I love the idea that something I write or say will be repeated and parroted by who knows how many people when they're sitting down with their friends at a bar that night, or that it gets sent, via the person in a group text every group text has like the person who's on top of the news, and that they'll take one of my tweets and send it to their friends, and it'll start a whole discussion. I feel like that's the value of social media. It's of bringing people together, and it's knowing that people have come up to me saying, I remember where I was when you tweeted this, and that I'm part of their lives. That is really cool to me. But at the end of the day, to me, that doesn't compare to telling a great story. And great stories can be told in different ways now. The written word is something that's near and dear to my heart because I've been doing it since I was 15 years old. Like, writing for local newspapers before I could drive. There's a romanticism to that. And I don't want to give up on the written word. I read something in the Times, I think it was last week, about how kids aren't reading books in school anymore. And I see it with my own kids. I see them sitting there and watching short form video and playing it on 2x speed. And I'm like, what the hell kind of dystopian world are we living in right now? Yeah. If I can help in some small form or fashion, keep the written word alive and thriving, I would like to be part of that rather than go to some other side of things. But that doesn't discount the possibility that there are multiple ways to tell a story. And those other avenues are really intriguing and really exciting to me, and something that, in the years to come, I imagine I'm going to be doing more.
Well, that's good. I'm glad. When you look back at the end of the year on the work that you did, I'm sure some of the highlights are, I broke this transaction and I beat that guy to the news. But ultimately, of course, that news is going to come out one way or another, and the team's going to announce it if you don't beat them to it. So I would guess that some of those longer form stories that you do and more of the personality driven profiles probably ultimately more satisfying in a lasting sense.
Yeah, for sure. And getting to tell a story that's not just this happened, this is why it happened, but something about this happened, this is why it happened, this is how it happened, and there are interesting details behind it. Like every great story to me, it's great because of the details therein. And a lot of times when I'm doing breaking news, there aren't a whole lot of details other than player, team, contract, or players, teams, trade. Doing a couple years ago when Soto got traded to the Padres, I did a TikTok of how that deal came down. And those, like reconstructing things that happened and trying to bring them to life, that brings me more professional joy than any news story ever will.
To be clear, for anyone who's hearing you say TikTok and says, I thought he hates short form video, Jeff means the journalistic term TikTok, just a long story about how it came together.
Yes, a TikTok is, the idea is a minute by minute, but it's not always a minute by minute of how it happened. It's just generally the broader strokes, and you zoom in on a couple of the more pertinent points of how it happened.
One thing I wonder about, technically teams are prohibited from telling you at least some of the things that they tell you. And I don't mean just in the sense that, front office person X isn't authorized to speak for the team, but the CBA, I believe this was a provision in the 2017 to 2021 CBA. It's still in the current one, but it was added in that one. It's known as Attachment 49 or Exhibit 49, a memo from the deputy commissioner laying out what the covered parties can or can't disclose to the media. And technically, they're not supposed to say, the substance of contract discussions between a player and a team, the substance of offers, decisions not to make offers. They're not supposed to announce agreements that are contingent on a physical until the physical actually takes place, right? You're not supposed to comment about the value of a unsigned free agent, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes teams will say, oh, we can't comment on free agents. That's not quite true. There are some things that they could say. They could say, we like that guy, as long as he's not on someone else's roster and it's not tampering, they could say they're interested in him. But a lot of the news that you break technically is not supposed to be shared. I mean, you can share it if someone tells it to you. You're allowed to do whatever you want with it, but they shouldn't, right? So is that an obstacle at all? Has that made the news breaking harder, or is that just entirely ignored, as long as there's anonymity and it's not going to come back on anyone in particular?
It just all depends on the person. There are some people who don't give a shit, and there are some people who do. And I've absolutely lost scoops because of people abiding by that, and that's it's part of the game, man. It's one of those things where it's not just me who's subject to that; it's all the other reporters too. So I feel like as long as the playing field is even there, then it's just a matter of who can do this the best.
I don't know if you can answer this if enough time has passed. If not, that's okay. But there was a period last year in the interregnum between Woj and Shams where ESPN was deciding who would be the replacement for Woj. And there was some reporting that it could be you, that you were considered at least. And ultimately that didn't turn out to be the case, of course. And I'm glad we didn't lose you on the baseball beat. But
thank you.
Were you seriously considered? Were you ever seriously considering switching sports? Because that's, you've built up this legacy and this Rolodex, and to switch to another sport, that's no small feat to take on that kind of role. So I wondered at the time, like, is this real? Is this a bargaining ploy, or is he actually interested in this? So
it was very real. It was not a bargaining ploy. It was something that a lot of people were encouraging me to do, and something that I genuinely, strongly considered, because not because I'm bored. I've been lucky. I've never had one of those moments where I was like, you know what? I feel burned out. This is too. No, it's never been like that. I've been doing this almost 25 years now, and the joy that I had that first day walking into a clubhouse, it still exists now. And if ever it got to the point where it didn't, then I would very much consider doing something else. But in this case, it was like, boy, this would be a pretty good challenge. This would be very interesting. And at the end of the day, what it came down to, I think, was that as I was considering this, I almost reported this job out like it was a story. I talked with a lot of people who have done it and who have done it well. I talked with a couple of GMs in the NBA. I talked with all kinds of people, just trying to get a sense of, is this going to fit in my life? And I think what it came down to was that it was going to take me 2 years to get good at this. And those 2 years would have been my older son's junior and senior years in high school. And I didn't want to miss things. And I know in this job that I have right now that I'm good enough at it, and that I have enough contacts where I can have the kind of life that I want. And that is frankly, the number one necessity for me. Can I be to my family what they need me to be? Because that is, no offense to anybody who gets news from me, but sorry, that's more important. and
Announce Kyle Tucker. Do you get tired of those replies?
I'm used to them by now. See them. Yeah, totally used to them. And at the end, when I factored in all of the things that it was going to take, and the compensation, and what it would mean for my family, in the end, it just didn't make enough sense to pursue. And so this was not, as much as I would love to say that this was out of a pure love of baseball and I could never leave baseball behind, that's not true. I do love baseball, but if something that was better for my life came along and better for my family came along, then I'd be stupid not to listen to it and at least consider it. And that's exactly what I did here.
What was it like for you as the senior MLB insider at ESPN when ESPN and MLB briefly broke up earlier this year and then got back together again?
Well, I'd like to say we're not a failing platform. So I think we've proven that. It's a part of the business that I never had to deal with during my time at the Kansas City Star at Yahoo. We were not, we weren't partners with the league, and there are inherent conflicts when you're on the journalist side, when the company that you work for is in business with the league that you're covering. And yet ESPN has, I appreciate this, they've never gotten in the way of the coverage that I've had. There's never been anything like you can't say that. No, it's never been anything like that. And so to me, it was just part of how things go. And I was hopeful that, we were going to keep baseball. I think the game needs ESPN, and not needs ESPN like as a corporate entity or anything like that, but needs the reach of ESPN, because at the end of the day, we still are the 800-pound gorilla in sports media. We still are the place that people go to. And it's remarkable to me that ESPN's had the stranglehold for as long as it has on the business of sports media. And look, the company's always evolving. I was just hopeful that it would not evolve away from baseball because I think it's a mutually beneficial relationship. I think baseball on ESPN gets the audience that it deserves, and ESPN having baseball shows that we cover as wide of a breadth of sports as we do.
I was going to ask about the conflict of interest, not even that one that you mentioned, although, yes, that's a thing. And, that's been even more explicitly discussed with ESPN and the NFL, with the league having an equity stake in the company, et cetera. But also sort of like a softer conflict of interest when you are a newsbreaker and you're to some degree dependent on people passing information to you. And yet you're also someone who publicizes information that is not flattering to perhaps those same people or teams sometimes. And to your credit, you certainly will publish stories that paint possible sources in a negative light, and other baseball newsbreakers do that too. So you're not one of these sort of, mouthpieces or stenographers for whatever a team or an agent or someone wants you to say. But I assume that there are some times when, you're pressing publish, you're reporting out a story and you're thinking, well, I'm burning this bridge. That's going to come back to bite me at some point.
Yep. It's not great. But it's the job. And I make it clear to all of my sources that that's the case. And most of them understand. Some of them do not. And that's just, that's the burden that I have to deal with. And if that's one of the worst things that happens in my job, uncomfortable conversations, then I'm living pretty good, Ben.
Well, I'm not going to ask you to announce Kyle Tucker, but is there any big picture thought, anything that surprised you, let's say, about the hot stove season so far, about the market in general?
I think the market's been really good for players, actually. Like the contracts that have been signed have been what, especially like on the relief side, there have been a lot of good deals, a lot of big numbers there. And yet we're still in a place where the top 5 free agents on Kylie McDaniel's board this winter still haven't signed. So there's a lot left to be done. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to see which teams step up and spend. Are the Blue Jays going to do more? Who are the Red Sox going to get? Because they have to get a big bat somewhere, whether it's bringing Alex Bregman back or replacing him via trade or free agency. The Red Sox have to do stuff. The Mets, it's been kind of a mess of a winter so far, but I'm not counting them out at this point by any means. They still have the richest owner in the game. They still have motivation to go out there and do it. Are there going to be other teams, though, that are in the mix as well? Do the Orioles have another bullet to fire? Do the Tigers or the Cubs step up? Like there are opportunities there, I think, for teams to still improve themselves demonstrably. And that's why this offseason to me is so fascinating, because as slow developing as it's been at the top of the market, I think there are going to be levers in place that get things moving. And, the posting end dates for Munetaka Murakami and Tatsuya Mai and Kazuma Okamoto, I think that's going to be part of it. Maybe there aren't dominoes that fall immediately in the aftermath of those, but at least there are dates that offer a little bit more clarity on the market.
And I assume you get asked this daily, but what is your current read, your snap judgment on whether there will be a work stoppage that actually jeopardizes games?
I think that the game is in too good of a place for all of the parties involved to potentially ruin that. I fear the lack of institutional knowledge and people seeming to forget just how bad the aftermath of the strike was will be a hindrance to that. But at the end of the day, if you ask me, will they lose games or will they not? Right now, I'm saying they will not.
Good. That's my sentiment too. But yours is probably more telling than mine, because you are constantly talking to people and you've been talking to me for a while now. So I'll let you go. This was very generous of you. We've made up for lost time. I've compressed the past 7 years of not having you on into this one podcast appearance. And please apologize to whoever called you in the middle of this conversation for delaying the return call.
I will make sure to do that, and I'm glad we were able to do this as long as we were. I got a couple of messages that I got to return now, but the transaction gods smiled upon us, Ben.
They did. The hot stove gods held off. You did not tweet during this conversation. You retweeted, but you did not tweet. So that's good. Happy Hanukkah. I look forward to your thankful for latkes tweet on Monday.
I am thankful for latkes. That is very true. I'm thankful for for salad spinners too, because if you shred your potatoes and your onions, they tend to weep a little bit, and nobody wants soggy latkes. So spin that sucker, throw a little bit of starch in there, fry them up, and it doesn't get a whole lot better than that.
Lovely. Food prep tips from Jeff Passan. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate you having me.
Well, Jeff informed me who had called him, and guess what? It turned out to be a former Effectively Wild guest. But which one, I will not say, because I will not burn Jeff Passan's sources. Right after we finished speaking, evidently satisfied that all the players involved had been informed, Jeff did tweet out the three-way trade news. This is the Pittsburgh, Tampa Bay, and Houston swap featuring Brandon Lau and others. As I mentioned, we'll get into that next time. And because Jeff was wondering how many times he had tweeted, that was his 39,578th tweet in 6,087 days since he joined Twitter in April of 2009. That's 6.5 tweets per day on average. Could be worse. Jeff next tweeted on Sunday when he broke the Munetake Murakami signing. And Jeff also broke his rule again about when to use breaking in all caps. He did it for this one, even though it was a 2-year deal for a mere $34 million. Big news and big name and big addition for the White Sox, though, and a bonanza for Meg, who took the under on $180 million for Murakami in the free agent contracts over underdraft. She's now way ahead of me based on that signing alone. More on Murakami to come. Another thing that happened after I spoke to Jeff, the Angels and the family of Tyler Skaggs settled a wrongful death lawsuit that's been wending its way through the legal system for years. Although the settlement staved off a jury verdict, the LA Times reported that jury foreman Richard Chung said after the settlement was announced that the panel had agreed to award Skaggs' family roughly $100 million when they were told to cease deliberations, $60 million to $80 million for economic damages, $5 million to $15 million for emotional distress damages, and $10 million to $20 million for punitive damages. How did the case get to that point? What did the Angels do wrong? What did we learn from these proceedings, and what could come next? Sam Blum of The Athletic, who's been covering this case from the start, will join me in just a moment to answer all of those questions and more. Substance abuse and addiction will come up, of course, in connection with Skaggs. Nothing too graphic, but be aware, and I will be right back.
Effectively wild. Effectively wild. Effectively wild. Effectively wild.
Well, on Friday at Orange County Superior Court in Santa Ana, the Angels and the family of former Angels pitcher Tyler Skaggs, who died of an overdose while on a team road trip in 2019, settled the wrongful death suit that the family had filed 4.5 years ago. That brought an end to a 3-month trial just as the deliberating jury was nearing its verdict. Sam Blum, who covers the Angels and MLB for The Athletic, was on the scene, as he has been throughout the rather sad and sordid case, and he joins me now. Hey, Sam.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for having me.
So we don't and probably won't know the terms of the settlement, but all indications are that this was not going well for the Angels, and that if the jury had been allowed to come to a verdict, that things would not have gone well for the Angels. So you observed the case, you talked to the foreman. What did we know about how this might have ended and why the Angels presumably were motivated to seek or acquiesce to a settlement?
So we ended up talking to quite a few of the jurors today, actually, and there was a range, I would say, in terms of how they viewed this case. You know, when they first got the case, there were about 4 of the 12 jurors that I don't think wanted to award the Skaggs family any money. About 4 that were undecided, and 4 that were very, very pro plaintiffs, a larger judgment essentially. Mm-hmm. Now I think through evaluating all the evidence, getting a better sense of, kind of how they all viewed this, 3 months really. I mean, 2.5 months of testimony, 3 months of trial proceedings. I think that there was a lot to go through. And once they did that, they ultimately determined, I think fairly quickly, that there was liability on the Angels front. Now, it's maybe the ultimate award would have been somewhere in the $80 to $100 million range before they put the apportionment, which is, the comparative fault, the percentages of how, a fault for each, party involved, all three of them, which is Tyler Skaggs, Eric Kay, and the Los Angeles Angels. So that could have lowered the value depending on how much fault they ultimately would have put on Tyler Skaggs himself for his own death. I know it's so complicated and there's so many elements to all this, and that's why the jury took, 2.5 days essentially before they called this thing, and I think the jury was going to find punitive damages, and that was why this case settled. I mean, on Wednesday afternoon, they asked a question of the court: where do we put in for punitive damages? Because on the form, they actually have to have a separate mini trial to determine what those punitive damages would have been, because the case was bifurcated before it ever started, right? It was split into two, and it was specifically on that punitive damages element. So they would have had to come back in and evaluate that, hear some testimony about the value of the Angels as an organization financially. So that was why this whole case ended. I mean, they asked that question, and I think the Angels panicked. I think you're totally right that the Angels believed that they were going to have a huge judgment. I also think that punitive damages are not something that would have been insured, essentially. Like, a lot of this was paid out through insurance, but that would not have been. That would have had to come out of Artie Moreno's pocket, I believe. Yeah. So that I think all of that played a role into kind of how we got to where we did today. And you're right, it's a confidential settlement, so it's, we'll see if that ever comes out. But for now, I mean, the Skaggs family looked at peace, and having sat there for as long as I did and for all those months and really getting to know their family, you feel for them. I don't think you can, that's irrespective of the sides you perceive and the facts of the case and everything you know about it. Like, this is somebody that lost, they lost their son, they lost their husband, they lost their friends. And this is, it was a hard thing. So to see them kind of at peace, I think was a nice silver lining to, what has been a really difficult few months for everybody involved, but also just, a long 6.5 years for that family.
Yeah, you lost a loved one. No amount of money is exactly going to make up for that. It's just, there's no, there are a lot of villains and victims in all of this, really. It's hard to feel good about any outcome, right? Because it's just top to bottom. It's just tragic and sad. Eric Kay, whom you just mentioned, if anyone hasn't been following this closely, the former Angels communication director who supplied the pill to Skaggs, had a drug problem himself. The pill that was ruled or found to have precipitated Skaggs' death, and Kay himself is serving 22 years in federal prison for his role in that, which I know plenty of people who think that he's quite culpable still think that was excessive, right? So it's I sat through that whole trial. As I said, I was there in 2022, and listen, I think that you can make a lot of testimony came out about Eric Kay's conduct over the course of his time with the Angels, including numerous affairs, berating people on the staff. Obviously, the drug element of it. He was high at work. He was eating a pimple off of Mike Trout's back. A lot of things were happening. So, you could sit around and say, yeah, okay. But the thing that has come to me throughout covering this case for 5 years now is you learn a lot about addiction. You learn a lot about what everybody was dealing with and the dynamics that, between player and PR staff. There's just so many elements to this. And I have a hard time with Eric Kay being in prison for 22 years personally. I went to prison. I spent time with Eric Kay. Not myself. I didn't go. I was at the prison. I did not go to prison. Yeah, but I spent time with Eric at that prison. He's a complicated person. It's a tough thing. It's a tough thing that he's there for 22 years. I firmly believe that. So, what came to light about this case or about the Angels organization? It's often when we talk to you, and it's typically around team preview time, and maybe we'll have you back in a couple months. But, when we kind of talk about Angels' dysfunction or incompetence, the stakes are fairly low. We talk about the team cheaping out and minor league pay and minor league nutrition and, not sending broadcasters on the road and backward player development and all of that. It's baseball stuff, and this is life or death, obviously. So what did you learn, or what came out as a result of this long proceeding and the 40 plus witnesses who came to the stand, including Mike Trout, as you said, Angels players, former players, personnel? What did we learn, and what sort of picture did it paint about the Angels organization?
I think you mentioned all those things, and I want to be careful in kind of how I characterize this, but I don't always see a lot of daylight between some of those maybe lower stakes, issues that you see in a bigger issue, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what I learned about the Angels was that they took no responsibility for this, right? They believe at least they say they believe they acted reasonably and responsibly with Eric Kay, and the evidence showed otherwise from what I was, I sat there and I watched it, and, the evidence was what it was. And so, you just see flaws. You see in this organization, you see ways that things, just, I don't know, the way, the power structure, the fact that so many Angels employees got up there, and I don't know what was in their heart or what was in their head, but there were a lot of times where I just didn't find their testimony credible, and it's I think it's as a result of kind of who they work for and where they're what they're kind of almost being instructed to testify to, and so you don't want to equate, hey, like the minor leaguers aren't making enough money and this, because these are very different things. But you see something within this organization that just, it needs addressing. And I think that always starts at the very, very top. I think I've met a lot of people in this organization that are really good people that do the right thing, that want to do the right thing. And a lot of those people testified, in my opinion, too. The craziest thing, and I say, I think this all the time, is like the Angels PR staff was the group that really got much maligned through this whole trial and everything that kind of came out. And, this is where Eric Kay was, and these are the people that worked alongside him. And I think that staff does as good of a job as you will find in Major League Baseball, if not better. I mean, I really do think that. And it's tough because it's like, these are people I've gotten closer to, has gotten to know them. And I've always found them to be really credible and really helpful. And so, you want to be careful about how you characterize the whole organization, but I do think that there is something fundamentally a little bit broken. Clearly, this doesn't happen without that, and I just think that comes from the highest elements of this franchise, and it's the people below that I feel for, who are just trying to keep their jobs, just trying to do their jobs, just trying to exist within the framework that they've been given, and it's not easy.
Yeah, plenty of people bear some responsibility for this and played some part in it, but just reading your coverage of the case, it just doesn't seem credible that the team could not have known about Kay's behavior or intervened in some way. So it's, the team is not solely responsible, but it certainly seems like bore some responsibility, and that the jury was going to come to that conclusion too. I kind of feel for the jurors who, set a few months of their life aside, and then the case is settled as they are about to reach a verdict. I guess that's, that happens. I mean, it's not as if the case was meaningless or something because of that. The settlement only happens because of those proceedings. But
and they seemed actually kind of relieved. I mean, some, I don't want to speak for all of them, but we talked to a good amount, and a lot of them were like happy that it settled. I think that's a lot of pressure to put. This isn't right. This is not a criminal case, so ultimately, right, like nobody's going to jail. Like nobody's lives are going to, be severely impacted beyond, I guess, kind of the ramifications of what comes out of a civil trial and the money. But I think some of them were just like, they were relieved. I think a lot of them were happy to get some of that stuff off their chest in terms of talking about it. And in talking to them, they had I want to say worried, but I was wondering, how much, I felt like so much of the Angels' argument was just not very credible. So much of what they argued, it's just, I sat through the trial. I know what was true, and I know a lot of the evidence, and I know a lot of the information here, and I've known it for months and years in some cases, and the Angels were not putting on a credible argument in many areas, and I was wondering how the jury was going to look at that, if they were going to kind of eat some of it up, if they were going to understand that. I mean, they did not have the benefit of sitting there listening to the sidebars. They did not have the benefit of reading through depositions as I did. So, they were working at a different plane of, of understanding to some extent. But I was impressed at how they kind of understood every element of it. They were paying attention. This was a jury that was paying attention, that really understood the evidence and spoke about it really clearly. So I think that some of them were relieved to not have to, make that judgment. And, the only way I can describe the scene after in court was just like everybody seemed kind of relieved. I mean, a lot of the Angels lawyers kind of stuck around to listen to some of the jurors, but, they weren't there too long. And, John Carpino, the Angels president, was there, at least for when the settlement was official. But it was, mostly just the plaintiff side there, and mostly just the jurors after that.
And I guess one of the nasty things about a proceeding like this inherently is that the team, in defending itself, has to cast aspersions on Skaggs himself, right?
They probably don't have to, but yeah.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I was going to ask you, I guess. The team's defending itself. Did it do that within the bounds of propriety, or did you feel like they went too far or farther than they had to in, condemning Skaggs' character? Or, part of it is that to try to reduce the damages, you have to make it seem like Skaggs wasn't that good, right? Or wouldn't have made that much money if he had survived. It's not totally unlike the arbitration process, I guess, where, that leads to bad blood when sometimes the player is in the room listening to the team talk about their flaws, right? And that's just that's part and parcel with that process. But that's what I wanted to know. Did they go too far when it came to how they talked about Skaggs?
I guess I would answer it this way. They have to decide for themselves, is it worth it? Because I would argue it isn't. I would argue that getting up there and telling the world that this pitcher was really bad, this guy was reckless, a bad person. I mean, I don't know if they ever use those words, a bad person, but it was the implication throughout the entire thing. Is it worth it? I don't know. I mean, that you have the right to defend your. I mean, listen, if you're going to defend this lawsuit fully, I could see why that was the strategy. They came to a settlement. I would argue that if they had looked inward from the beginning and seen that they bore certain responsibilities for this wouldn't have been necessary. Listen, I had a hard time with that part of it, because it's like, this, and Daniel Duca, who's the Skaggs lawyer, I think kind of summed it up well in his closing argument when he said that that the version of Tyler Skaggs they're painting is just not one that anybody saw or sees or believes or knows. It's just not a person that people know. I never met Tyler Skaggs, so I'm not going to sit here and tell you on everything. I think that he was a flawed person just like anybody. I think he had his issues at times in his life, but they were trying to paint Tyler as someone that had a horrible drug addiction from 2011 to 2019 when he died. There was no evidence that Tyler Skaggs was abusing drugs from 2014 to at least the beginning of 2017. So, and the judge was routinely, calling out that argument as not very credible either, and just, not allowing certain evidence in because she felt like it was compounding other evidence, because there just wasn't any evidence that he was actually a drug abuser for those 3 to 4 years. And that's an important element. Was he continuously losing? Because I think the Skaggs side was arguing, well, he was maybe a drug addict in 2011 through 2013, but at the time of his death, this was someone that was using pills to, address pain, to maybe, probably wasn't doing everything the right way, but it was, not necessarily a full-blown, uncontrollable addiction. And I don't know. You have Dan Duquette getting up there arguing that he wasn't valuable as a pitcher. They're completely taking his statistics out of context, saying that he was on the decline of his career when he was on the exact opposite. He was the best pitcher on the Angels at the time, and he was on track for about a 2.2 WAR season, had just finished off a 1.8 WAR season. He was going to hit free agency, I believe, at 28 or beginning 29. He was hitting it at the right time. This is a guy that I think would have easily earned what the plaintiff. I actually thought the plaintiffs were a little conservative in what they had asked for on his future earnings, and I felt like 90 to 100 would have been very reasonable for a left-handed pitcher who was on the upward trajectory of his career, because that is what he was. He was not on the downswing. He might have gotten there at some point, but he wasn't at that point.
What came to light in Trout's testimony and any other players? Because that's a strange position to be in, I guess, as a former teammate and friend of Skaggs, and then also an employee and representative of the Angels organization. You referenced the pimple incident, which, again, it's just sad and kind of gross and just tragic on a whole lot of levels. This was essentially a clubhouse dare, right, that Trout talked about, that they had, I guess, Kay had sort of put them up to it for money, like eat a pimple off his back. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Trout said like he was not cognizant of the depths of the problem that Kay was experiencing at that time. He wasn't, trying to profit from the guy's addiction. And when he learned more, then that sort of stuff stopped. And
he offered to pay for his help. I mean, he offered to pay for his rehab too. So, I mean, listen, I mean, I think this is embarrassing. This whole thing was a little embarrassing for Mike Trout. I mean, the pimple's obviously not ideal. And you're also talking about Mike Trout at that time, like 24, 25 years. I mean, it's a different time in his life. I don't think he had kids. It's tough. The thing I come back to with Trout is less about his testimony and more about, Mike Trout there is nothing at Angel Stadium commemorating Tyler Skaggs. And I think that was something that Grace McNamee, one of the PR people, testified about. It's something that bothered her. But Mike Trout has a little shrine next to his locker of all these photos of him and Skaggs together, all these like little mementos from their friendship. I mean, they lived together in the minor leagues. They were drafted the same year. They became really close. So this was a close friend of his. And I wonder how he views this, how closely he's followed this. It's probably something it's worth asking him about at some point when we get back in front of him, because, this is someone that he felt close to. And then the people representing his organization are kind of making this case. Now, it's not that it's not that simple. He's also close with a lot of the other people that are in the organization that testified, like Tim Mead and Tom Taylor, who are, obviously maybe testifying more on behalf of the defense at that point. So it's a complicated situation. I thought it was interesting that Trout had his own counsel. He did not utilize Angel's counsel, which I think allowed him to, speak a little bit more freely. I mean, he's someone that he's not losing his job, right? He's on a contract. So he was able to be a little bit more honest, I felt like, and, kind of talk about being aware of Kay's drug addiction, which is not something other Angels employees really acknowledge too openly. I have a hard time like giving Trout too much crap for some of the stuff that came out, because I think you look back at those things in the context of everything we know and it looks worse, like the pimple stuff. And the Angels clubhouse obviously had its issues. There's no doubt about that. But, it's also, it's so easy to look back and kind of judge in hindsight. And of all the things we've learned in this trial, that's one of the least problematic, in my opinion. It sucks. It's not good. And those types of dares definitely shouldn't happen. I would put that on the line of hazing, but there was obviously reasons it was happening. And once Trout realized those, at least according to all the evidence we know, he handled it properly.
Yeah, sort of a sensational story, but also kind of a sideshow, I guess. So I've seen people question, why did the Angels persist in this case? Why not spare themselves 3 months of legal fees, plus airing all this dirty laundry, plus looking bad in any number of ways, when it turned out that they were just going to settle and presumably pay some hefty amount in the settlement? And, of course, you can't come to the same terms before the whole trial plays out. That changes the leverage and expectations and everything. But certainly seems, I don't know whether Skaggs' family, how receptive they would have been to an offer before this all happened, but if they could do it over again, do you think the Angels would do this differently? And is it a failure of self-evaluation that they even took things this far?
I think, self-evaluate, yeah, I think to some extent. There's other elements that I think are kind of playing a role, like the insurance companies. They have to authorize their portion of the money. There are different insurance companies that all have kind of different levels of money that they can authorize to be part of a settlement. And so I think, the initial settlement offers were quite low because the second block of insurance wasn't going to cover anything. Now, that being said, Artie could have come out and said, hey, I am willing to pay out of pocket for this and to settle this. And I certainly think the Skaggs side was open to a settlement from the very beginning. They didn't want to get up there and be grilled about their what they knew, their son, their husband. It was uncomfortable for them. This was a difficult thing. And, in closing arguments, the Angels lawyer, Todd Theodora, argued that Debbie Hetman, Tyler's mom, provided false testimony when, that's just not how I looked at it. But, I don't think anybody wanted to have that happen. And so this would have very easily made sense to settle. And again, as I said earlier, I think that if you're the Angels, it's looking inward to some extent and recognizing that you do have some responsibility here. You might not agree that it's the level of responsibility or the dollar amount or whatever it is you end up coming to, but clearly Eric Kay had an addiction. Clearly people were aware of that addiction. And the policies of the team clearly weren't followed. So if they were like looking inward at the evidence and being honest with themselves, I think they would have seen that there was at least some responsibility here. And I think a settlement would have made some sense. As a reporter, I mean, I can appreciate the fact that a lot of interesting things happened in this trial that gave us a real window into the team and the way it operates. And, you know, you could argue that some of these secrets coming out, I think, are a good thing. And hopefully, the end result is that this never happens again, that nothing like it even comes close to happening again. And I'm not saying it's going to be the exact same situation the next time, but, you know, following your policies are important. You know, I think that, you know, there's always room for nuance, but nuance was taken to an extreme here with how they handled Eric Kay. And that was a mistake. And I think that is a lesson to be taken from this that maybe wouldn't have if it hadn't all been testified to in open court and written about and, you know, all of the things that happened. But, you know, yeah, I think everyone would have benefited from maybe having this taken care of earlier, particularly the witnesses and the family. I mean, you know, I don't know about Artie or not. You know, Artie kind of gets off on this, right? He showed up on the first day of the trial for opening statements, but, you know, this is his team and he really was kind of shielded from testifying or from the accountability element of everything.
Yeah, and I've seen people say, why would Skaggs' family want to settle on the verge of a victory, seemingly? And I guess, you know, a few reasons. One, you never know 100% which way a jury is going to go. And also, there could have been appeals, right? And this could have stretched on forever and put you through even more of the emotional ringer. And presumably they were pretty pleased with the terms of the settlement and maybe didn't think that they could do all that much better. So I certainly understand that from their perspective, and hopefully for everyone's sake, this kind of closes the book on the legal proceedings. It doesn't necessarily close the book, though, when it comes to Major League Baseball and any punishment the Angels might face. And this was one interesting thing that came out of this, is that the Angels VP for Human Resources testified that the team had worked with MLB to address Kay's addiction and that the team was complying with MLB policy, and MLB has denied that, right? And so now that this has worked its way through the court, all this information goes to MLB, and MLB has to decide whether to hand down some additional punishment to the Angels, and probably a league that is not pleased about being roped into this in some way. So what happens next?
You know, I tend to, this is just my opinion, I tend to think that this settlement, that, you know, and, you know, you talked about the benefits of the settlement for the family and for everyone involved, but I do think one of the things that might happen as a result of that is it's hard for me to imagine that Major League Baseball is going, I mean, I don't know, you never know, is going to kind of take a proactive approach here, given that this was a confidential settlement, which means anything could have happened. Means that it could have been $0, right? Like, so they're kind of shielded from having to do anything, in my opinion. Now, that being said, you mentioned Deborah Johnston, and that was, for Major League Baseball to have come out and refuted the testimony was, I thought, significant. And then that came out in court. I enjoyed having my name on the written record there, which was fun because that was from our article. But you know, that was crazy. I mean, that testimony was just false, right? Like, you know, and then you hear the Angels lawyer going and throughout the rest of the trial saying, that's not what she said. That's not what she said. And it was what she said. Read the transcript of it. She said that the team worked with Major League Baseball. They said that he was tested under MLB's policy. Said that they communicated with MLB investigator named Moira Weinberg. All these things were just, you know, either wrong or not within the scope of the time frame that, you know, we were working with it to understand this case. So that MLB element of it is fascinating. I'm sure that they'd love to do something, but it's also, you know, you have to understand the dynamics here, and it's, you know, especially as you head into what is going to be a complicated negotiation for the upcoming CBA, and already always being kind of a thorn in this league side with that stuff, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, I don't know what will happen. You'd like to think in the right world that MLB is going to be taking an impartial and fully accountable approach and reading through all the testimony and deciding to, you know, levy whatever they think is appropriate. But it's also, you understand the dynamics between the owners and the commissioner, and I think the settlement kind of giving a window into maybe they don't have to do something now that it's kind of been litigated out of court, theoretically, I guess technically, even though all of that happened in court. I don't know what will happen, but, you know, I think the conduct is there for them to review that. And at the very least, address kind of this idea that they were operating within the MLB's guidelines when it came to treating Eric Kay, which I don't think the jurors bought that for a second from talking with them.
Yeah, if only the terms of the settlement forced Artie Moreno to sell the team. Probably no such luck. So, yeah, you referenced this earlier. Just wondering if there's anything else positive that could come out of this aside from the Skaggs family getting paid. And I know that MLB already tweaked its quote-unquote drugs of abuse policy after Skaggs' death. And I think before 2020, there was no random testing for opiates and other recreational drugs. And now there's testing, and the results lead to potential treatment and hopefully forestall another incident like this. And you hope that the Angels will learn from this. Probably the exact same situation won't arise, one would hope, but hopefully they put their processes in place or at least adhere to their own policies. Do you think that there's anything league-wide ramifications that could come from just wanting to avoid another situation like this? Or is it just kind of a team by team, you trust that they will do the right thing and follow what they're supposed to do?
I mean, it's what the thing I come back to is like, what could the league have done here? I mean, I really, and I'm not sitting here gonna defend everything that the league does because that's not how I feel. But I mean, in this particular situation, and Rusty Hardin, the Skaggs lawyer, said this after the thing happened today. Like, what MLB's not responsible for this. Like, they set up a pretty good system of having a drug policy oversight committee. Their policies, as I continuously heard throughout this trial, made a lot of sense to me in terms of how you have to report, how there's intervention programs, there's testing programs, there are ways to make it so even if you report somebody, they're not necessarily going to face getting fired or arrested or whatever. There's ways to address this that seem to make a lot of sense through MLB's policies. The only thing that wasn't done here was that process. The process is good. I don't know what else they could have done. Instead of unless there's anything short of actively drug testing your employees at, every couple months, which I don't think that would even be legal. So to me, I don't think there is anything to really change on that front. I think that team, if anything, hopefully this just is a reminder to everybody that when you see this happening, that you're not helping the person by not reporting it, right? You're not helping anybody by letting this continue on. I think that if I had to get in Tim Mead and Tom Taylor's head, and I'm only going based on the evidence, their testimony kind of refuted some of the things that happened, but based on what I believe happened here, I think that they thought they were doing right by Eric and operating with nuance, and I can appreciate that and I can respect that, but it got to a point where something needed to happen, and I think that hopefully the next time something needs to happen, whenever that is, and to whoever that is, and whatever team or wherever it is in the league, there is a better way to address it, and somebody can think back to this whole situation and do better.
Well, thank you for your tireless work covering this case, and hope that you can get some rest and spend a little less time in court going forward.
I don't mind court, so we'll see. But thank you so much for having me, and this is a nice way to kind of decompress from everything and honestly just kind of get my thoughts out there, because throughout this whole thing I've tried to not really express my opinion too much in any capacity. You're sitting there, you're thinking these things, but now that it's over, now that it's been written, I think kind of wanted to share my perspective on things, and so I'm super happy that you had me on. So thank you.
Okay, we'll be back soon with a transaction roundup and more. And I'll remind everyone that we are soliciting submissions for stories we missed about each and every team in 2025. We'll be collecting and recapping those in the last week of the year. So keep them coming. Anything interesting that you think we may not have discussed this year, but should bring up now. You can support Effectively Wild on Patreon by going to patreon.com/effectivelywild and signing up to pledge some monthly or yearly amount to help keep the podcast going, help us stay ad-free, and get yourself access to some perks, as have the following 5 listeners: Nicholas Brady, Brandon Paul Weaver, Patrick Ferguson, Zach Starr, and James Smith. Thanks to all of you. Patreon perks include access to the Effectively Wild Discord group for patrons only, monthly bonus episodes, personalized email answers, playoff live streams, shoutouts at the end of episodes, prioritized email answers, personalized messages, discounts on merch, and ad-free FanGraphs memberships, and so much more. Check out all the offerings at patreon.com/effectivelywild. If you are a Patreon supporter, you can message us through the Patreon site. If not, you can contact us via email. Send your questions, comments, intro and outro themes to podcast@fangraphs.com. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Effectively Wild on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and other podcast platforms. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/effectivelywild. You can find the Effectively Wild subreddit at r/effectivelywild. And you can check the show notes in the podcast post at FanGraphs or the episode description in your podcast app for links to the stories and stats we cited today. Thanks to Shane McKeon for his editing and production assistance. We'll be back with one more episode before Christmas, so we will talk to you then.
Take me to the diamond, lead me through the turnstile, shower me with data that I never thought to compile. Now I'm feeling out my scorecard with a crack-jacked smile.